Open water swimming is one of the things that makes triathlon unique. There are many differences to pool swimming, and beginners, and in fact even experienced triathletes, can find it quite intimidating. The next few minutes show us some tips and techniques that make it much easier to get used to swimming in open water. It's very important to get a lubricant that's not going to damage your wetsuit, and it's the first thing you do before putting your wetsuit on is apply the lubricant in certain areas. First thing is try not to get it on your hands if at all possible, because then it can get transferred onto your goggles and cause problems there. The main area where wetsuits tend to rub is around the neck, so make sure you apply some lubricant around that area. Secondly, you want to put some lubricant on your wrists and ankles, because these are the areas that tend to stick when you're taking your wetsuit off. So by putting the lubricant on there, everything should slip off nice and easily and save you time in transition. So when you come to put on your wetsuit, you would normally wear all the kit underneath it that you're going to use for that training session or the race. In this case, we're showing Stephen with just his training kit on underneath his wetsuit. Be very careful when you're touching the wetsuit that you just use the pads of your fingertips. You don't want to use your fingernails, because you can easily cut the very delicate neoprene. It's important to pull the wetsuit up really carefully so that you get a really good fit. You don't want water coming into it while you're swimming. You should be a very small amount of water that gets between the wetsuit and your body, and that's what helps it to work to keep you warm. But you don't want any folds in the wetsuit that are going to fill up with water and drag you as you're swimming. So it's important to pull the wetsuit well up on the arms, particularly because you need to have the good flexibility around your shoulders when you're swimming. The wetsuits are carefully designed to provide that, but it's important to get the fit correct at the time you're putting them on. Therefore, make sure that you allow plenty of time to do this before the race starts. As you get towards the end of putting your wetsuit on, you'll need the help of a friend to do your zip up. Make sure that they get the tag in a position where you can get it easily when you come out of the water. Make sure you can reach that, you know which hand you're going to get it with. Sometimes at the start of a race it'll be a dive start. It's not very common in age group races. Most elite races start with a dive, but it does happen, so you should be prepared for it. If it's a dive start, you want to do a very similar dive to what you would do in a pool. The only real difference is that you should go a bit shallower. You don't want to go too deep, because there'll be other people diving in close to you, and you don't want them being above you when you surface from your dive. More commonly, you'll get a deep water start. This means you get into the water before the race, you get lined up, and then you wait for the starter's command to set you off. Important thing here is to make sure that you're horizontal in the water. Get your feet up close to the surface is the key thing. Be on the start line in plenty of time, looking in the direction that you want to swim, and ready to react to the starter's horn or the start signal. As soon as you hear the start signal, you set off at the pace which you want to do to the first turning buoy. So this will be a bit quicker than your normal swim pace. It means your stroke rate should be a bit higher, and you will be working a little bit harder than your average pace for the swim. Once you've got through the first section of the swim, you then settle down into your cruising pace. It's a good idea to practice this in training, and you can do it by, for example, just swimming a hard rep of 100 meters at that starting pace and then settling down into your pace, which you'll keep for the remainder of the swim. Here we see Stephen. He's just floating on the surface of the water and then working really hard as he shoots off towards the first turning buoy. If you look in slow motion, you'll see how close to the surface his feet are. You can see that he's sculling with his hands to get a good feel for the water. And then as the start signal goes, he pulls back strongly and kicks quite hard to get the most acceleration that he can away from the start line. It's really important when you're swimming in open water to make sure that you're swimming in a straight line. It's remarkable how difficult it is to do that, and it's very easy to do a lot of extra distance without intending to. The best thing to do is to make sure that you look up frequently. I would suggest that you should definitely look up every 6 strokes, and if it's coming up to a turning buoy or a critical part of the race, or you're not sure that you're going in the right direction, then you should look more frequently. You can see here Stephen's looking up every couple of strokes and breathes to the side and looks up to the front. So you can do that either way around. You can either look to the front first and then breathe, or you can breathe and then look to the front. Another important thing about sighting is that it's really useful if you can breathe to both sides. You want sometimes to be able to look to the left or to the right, depending on where the turning buoys are. And so if you're used to, in a pool, breathing to both sides equally easily, then you can do that in a race, and that helps you to keep your position and not do too much extra distance. In swimming, you'll have noticed that when you get in behind somebody, there's a lot less effort required to keep going at the same speed. This is the drafting effect. Similar to when you're on a bike, there's less resistance when you're close behind somebody. So therefore, you want to make use of this in open water swims where typically you've got lots of other people round about you. The most obvious time is when you're up behind somebody and you're right on their feet. Here we've got a good example of somebody who's drafting very closely. They're virtually touching the feet of the person in front. This will save you a lot of energy, or allow you to keep up with a faster swimmer if you can draft them all the way around the swim. It's still important to look and sight just to be sure that the person you're following is going the right direction. It's not guaranteed that they are going to swim the shortest line, so you do have to be careful not to get led astray. It is quite important to be really close to the feet. The further back you are, the less benefit you get. So there's not much point in leaving a couple of meters gap. Instead, it's much better to move up until you're virtually touching the person in front's feet with every stroke. However, don't clamber on top of them, because their automatic reaction then will be to kick really hard, and you could get your goggles kicked off or get a nasty bruise. Another way of drafting is to be alongside the person that you're drafting from. If your shoulders are more or less equal with their hips, you get just as much benefit as when you're behind them. But you have the advantage that it's much easier to see whether they're going off course or not, because you can sight clearly past them. Also, if they do divert or if they leave a gap in front, it's much easier then for you to move up, perhaps onto the feet of another swimmer in front who's going a little bit faster. Again, to get the maximum benefit, you want to be really close to the person beside you. You should be so close that you really have to get your arms in synchronization with them. If you don't, then you'll start to knock hands and arms and it all gets a little bit uncomfortable. But if you're able to get your arms in synchronization, then you can swim along quite happily and only be a few centimeters away from them. There are parts of the swim where you'll have to make a turn round a buoy. There's a couple of different ways of doing that. If you've got some nice clear water, then a very neat turn is the backstroke turn. We see Stephen doing the backstroke turn in slow motion here. He stretches out with the hand nearest to the buoy and then turns over onto his back and uses his other hand to point in the direction that he wants to go. Here again we have it from overhead, and we can see that he just looks up and puts his hand so that he is able to go in the correct direction. You've got to be really careful just after a buoy to sight, because it's the one place where you can go really badly wrong if you go a few degrees off course just after a turn. If there's more people round about you and it's a bit crowded to turn onto your back, you can do a different turn where you just shorten the stroke on the inside of the buoy and bring your other stroke a little bit longer to turn round. Again, it's really important to make sure that you keep in tight to the buoy and that you look where you're going on the way out. We can see from this overhead angle that Lois just shortens her stroke on the inside as she goes round the buoy and brings her other hand round in a longer than normal recovery, so that she's then going at 90 degrees to the angle which she approached the buoy. It's very important to recce the area where you're going to exit from the swim before the start of the swim. You want to have a look and see what it's like under the surface of the water. It might be slippy, it might be stony, it might be uncomfortable. You want to check all that out beforehand so it's not a surprise to you as you come towards the end of your swim leg. See here, Stephen is coming up onto a fairly slippy ramp, so he uses his hand on the side just to keep his balance. As soon as you're clear of the water, you want to be reaching for your wetsuit zip. So he gets a zip down, he pulls the wetsuit down over his arms and then down over his knees, and he tries, without using his hands, to stand on the wetsuit and pull it off. When you're on the edge of the water, like this, there's a lot of water in the wetsuit, it will come off very easily. It may not come off as easily when you've run through 300 meters to the transition area, but you do have the advantage that while you're doing that run, you can be getting the wetsuit down as far as your hips while you're still moving.